Hey, Rena.
Hello, Dr. Bach.
Hopefully, I'm muted correctly this time. Um, Hello again.
Hi.
Good. Welcome, everyone, to a free association conversation between Rena K and myself, Dr. Bach Ho. We're both organic intelligence coaches. We help people reduce suffering and increase capacity to handle more in life with ease using the protocols of organic intelligence. In these live stream free association conversations, Rena and I try to aim both at people who are completely new to organic intelligence and people who already know its basics. We try to find the balance. Today, our topic is what is auto organization and who cares? So last week, I offered that I thought the four most important concepts in organic intelligence were orientation, pleasure, auto organization, and thresholds. And then after we had a bit of talk, I somewhat backslid. I said maybe orientation and pleasure are the most important for practical purposes and for learning about organic intelligence without getting technical under the hood. And then thresholds are more under the hood. And auto organization, I would say, is somewhat in between, maybe. But in some sense, it is the most important concept because it's organic intelligence is a theory of auto organization. What is auto organization? It is the process of your biology, and by biology we mean your whole organism. Your biology changing. Sometimes we say reorganizing or organizing to increase its capacity to process information and intensity, to handle life, to handle stuff, to process stuff more automatically and easily. That's what auto organization is. Sometimes Steve, the founder of Organic Intelligence, I believe, calls it auto regulation. So if you hear him say that, or if you when you research organic intelligence through whatever ways you research, if people say auto regulation, they most likely they mean auto organization. Um, you may sometimes hear people say or write self-organization, and they may mean by that auto organization, or they may not. If they use self-organization, and if they mean auto organization by it, the self-organization is the term that comes from complexity science. I'm sorry if I'm being pedantic, but I feel like I just want to be clear and map out stuff. It comes from complexity science, which is one of the fields that Steve draws on. Okay, I want to say a little bit of technical stuff, and then we can get into more familiar stuff. Rena, thanks for bearing with me. Um, for those in the audience, for viewers who are really interested in like under the hood science, technical, very refined stuff, you look into allostasis, ALLOSTASIS. It's the phenomenon of an organism changing its internal physiology in anticipation of future demands. Uh, it's typically contrasted with homeostasis, although there's a whole debate about what exactly is the relationship between allostasis and homeostasis. So you can look into that. In one particular article you can look at is Sung Lee's, I don't remember the title exactly, but paradigm of allostatic orchestration, something to that effect. I'll find it later and link it in the description. So a little bit of background on that, and then we will get into to our normal talk. Well, this is free association; it's all normal, right? So I initially found Sung Lee's work through my own research, and when I read that article, I had a holy shit moment because I thought this is the theoretical groundwork for auto organization. It's a very technical, cryptic, hard to read article above my head because you have to know neuroscience stuff. But it was like this is the article. I mean, I was already on to allostasis with Steve and main figures in allostasis, and then I found Sung Lee. I introduced Sung Lee to Steve, uh, introduced his work to Steve, and then on Zoom he had a holy shit moment, and then I had a double holy shit moment. Like this is organic intelligence, the groundwork. So you could look into the principle or paradigm of allostatic orchestration, and then Steve and I were meditating on the idea that auto organization is the chief allostatic principle. All right, that's a lot of technical stuff. get into it if you want to. Okay, back to I guess more matters that people are more likely to care about. Um, I feel like I do want to say just a little bit about auto organization. Um, I changed my mind. Would you care to begin?
Yeah, I appreciate hearing that article about that particular article because I've looked up the concept as well and did not come across that. So I'm
Okay.
looking forward to looking that up and seeing because you talked about him being from from a neurology perspective. I've looked at it more from general biology. And so, because the plant kingdom and the animal kingdom and whatnot are all following principles of allostasis as well as organization, self or auto organization. And we might end up distinguishing the difference between those two in terms of organic intelligence. But
Sorry,
um,
can
but
I
certainly
interrupt?
to lok at it from a neurology point of view, I
I
think is
want
really valuable.
Rena, let me interrupt. Sorry, I this is very intentional, mindful, apologetic interruption. But one more point about the Sungli, and then I'll because you said you appreciate learning about that article. Just some background for the audience and everyone. The recent article that Steve and I wrote in the Porges edited volume. Initially, we were planning on focusing on this on that art the Sungli article and arguing on that groundwork that auto-organization was the main principle of allostasis. And then over time the article morphed into something else, which is what it was in importance. But I sorry for the interruption, but I wanted to name that point to indicate just how significant that particular article was for me, for Steve, for the thinking about organic intelligence and auto-organization. Okay, sorry,
Great. Cool.
please. Yeah.
Cool. Well, it seems to me that, from his work, it'd be worthwhile, somewhat again technical, but that could be very helpful to go, well, what do you mean, or what is Sung Lee? Was it Sung Lee?
Sung
Sung,
Lee, yeah.
yeah.
Sung
What
Lee.
does he mean by allostasis, and how you see that in relation to auto organizations versus self-organization?
Yes. I mean, we could look into that, you and I, in the back, and then see what we want to do on live stream. And then we have other topics like
Okay.
possible, like, the inactivism and stuff like that. Okay.
Right. Right.
All
Right.
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 But please
Yeah.
tell us, talk to us about auto organization, Rena.
Right, because it seems like kind of it's an interesting term. I don't know that I've seen it anywhere else. And in the early days, as Steve was developing his understanding and kind of pulling from these various disciplines, he would often use the word self-organization. And that was an early term, and that was the idea that the self, or the biology, and that was just the word self was a synonym for biology, and biology, you mentioned at the very beginning, that's just a word for the whole being, the whole self. And so the fact that there's organizing principles that are happening automatically to move us in the direction of either growth or stability, depending on what's necessary in the moment, that is happening outside of our conscious awareness and our own efforts to try to make it happen. In other words, that is automatic. And in time, Steve morphed into using auto organization as separate from the idea of self organization, because we think of self organization as I'm doing something to myself. And of course we can make choices and make decisions to take certain behaviors, but those may or may not help the system or catalyze the system in the direction of organization. So oftentimes when the self gets involved, we do things that are not necessarily going to be helpful to ourselves, even if we think that they are. That's one of the premises, or one of the ideas in organic intelligence, is how often we don't quite get that right. And so much of what Steve's been sharing is how can we get out of the way of our own biology, knowing that our own biology has its growth trajectory, well-being trajectory built into the system. So, in relation to the environment, as long as we don't have the kind of conditioning that would keep our system to move in a direction of growth, it's automatically going to want to do that. And so to me, it's just one of those fundamental concepts that I found transformative in my thinking and then my work with clients. How often can we support getting out of the way and not trying or efforting to do certain things to try to get a certain outcome? And if we look at the outcome as being, I just want a biology that works better regardless of the circumstances, if that's our outcome, then we can trust that our biology knows how to do that, to the level that a dog or a cat or a spider or bacteria know how to do that. The difference is we have a mind that can get in the way and or support it. So I'll stop there and then see how you want
Okay.
to comment to that.
I want to throw out some concrete examples.
Yep.
One I go to normally is a guy wants to ask a girl on a date, but he's nervous. So if he has a therapist or coach, that coach might say, all right, what if you do 20 push-ups and do some positive self-talk? And then maybe if you do the push-ups and then the positive self-talk, then you can text her saying, would you like to go out sometime? And maybe he does that, 20 push-ups, positive self-talk, and then I text the girl. And that would be an example of using effort a little bit uncomfortably because it's nerve-wracking. And then you're doing something with your nervousness. You're doing push-ups, you're doing positive self-talk. You organize yourself, you self-organized, self here meaning exerting effort, volition. You self-organized to ask her on a date. So that would be, and that's mainstream advice. You do stuff, do XYZ, protocols, visualization, push-ups, mindfulness, cold plunges, and then you can ask a girl on a date. um, to contrast with that, organic intelligence offers, in my judgment, far superior alternative, which is auto-organization, where you can get to a point where you can ask the girl out effortlessly and easily. It doesn't require push-ups or other top-down efforting measures. So asking a girl on a date, but more generally, just dealing with anxiety. That issue was anxiety, right? So anxiety, if you have anxiety, you go to therapy or coaching or some online course or program, do XYZ, like cognitive cognitive monitoring, or do some breathing, do some smelling, some fragrances, just a bunch of stuff to manage. And organic intelligence would say self-organization is great at a certain point, and there's something better, which is auto-organization, where your biology sorts out the anxiety automatically. How in the world is that possible? We'll get into that. And for many people, it's kind of mysterious and magical and hard to believe, but it's very normal work in organic intelligence. Clients come to me, they have anxiety. It looks like we're doing absolutely nothing. We're just talking about whatever, flowers, the wall that they see, a ladybug on the wall, or French fries, and then they just notice within a few weeks their anxiety is dramatically down and it stays down, and they can't, like, what did we do? We didn't do anything. Organic intelligence doesn't do anything. It's just hocus pocus. It's a scam, and yet and yet their anxiety is down permanently.
Yeah.
Unless, setting aside just vicissitudes of life, but so that's an example of auto organization and its power.
Right. Right.
Um,
I have an anecdote too, if you
go ahead.
want,
Yeah,
like in
please.
terms
Yep.
of how I see this, and we've mentioned on occasion that I work a large number of my clientele that come to me is because they experience a lot of shame, chronic, debilitating shame thoughts, shame, freeze, like not lack of motivation, feeling like a imposter, those kinds of things. And so often, the if you look online, what to do about shame, it might be similar things, right? Like, do a power pose, every day, say affirmations to yourself, like how you're a great person, and just repeat those over and over. Take your shame thoughts and try to, capture each thought that goes in your head that is shameful or shaming of the self, the harsh critical voice, and then write it down and find the opposite and what might be more true. Those kinds of activities would be falling in the category of I'm trying to somehow regulate myself. I'm trying to somehow change what is emerging automatically in myself. And what happens to be emerging automatically is these, thoughts, images, emotions that are the feelings the constellation that we call shame. And that's very different than the kind of work that I take people through, which is none of that. We don't spend any time looking at the thoughts and trying to change them, or we don't spend any of the time trying to figure out how to not feel like, say, physiologically collapsed, right?
Mm,
Instead, we're doing the things that you've mentioned over and over, where we're spending lots of time doing orientation in multiple ways, connecting up to multiple senses. We're spending time connecting with pleasure, including pleasure from the horrible, awful, terrible, no good past, right? So if you've got chronic shame, there's often been a historically challenging early life. And so we're not going to spend time digging all that stuff up and trying to, process it or release it or any of that stuff. But what happens at the end of the course, usually around 4 months in, people start going, wow, those thoughts aren't coming up anymore. Or, oh, the thought came up. And then all of a sudden I noticed the I was more drawn to the tree that was outside that was waving in the wind, and I didn't have to make the thought go away. There was just an automatic attraction to something else, and oh, that's happening more and more often, and there isn't even room for those thoughts or feelings. They start to not show up anymore. And that is what we call auto organization.
right.
That the what the biology is doing is providing new information to emerge from, into one's awareness. And it happens to be along the lines that help you feel better about yourself, that help you feel like you can do things and motivate yourself, that help you get things done in a way that feels good and not stressful, that helps you be able to be in relationship with other people without feeling like you don't belong in some way. Like all of those things just begin to happen. And you're right, most of my clients go, this is weird. The first couple months of my course, they're like, what are we doing? And why is this, is this going to help? And then somewhere along the way, they go, wow, like this is changing. Different people will be at different times. It'll just be mundane moments of, oh, in the past, I would have handled this way. And now I'm handling it in a totally different way.
yes. Auto organization, I believe, the process of increasing capacity, it's a hard sell. Um, so the way I market myself actually I think sucks, but I do it even though I know it sucks. So on my website, I'll say I help people increase their capacity. And Steve has told me that sucks. You gotta say something like I help people, I'll reduce your anxiety. And when I followed his advice, I did get more client interest. So his advice was good, but I kept it. I turned it back to increase capacity because I'm trying to stay in the mental zone personally of identifying what organic intelligence is exactly. So where am I going with this? Auto organization. It's hard to sell because it's so it's not known. The power is so profound, as we've discussed. Reduce anxiety, reduce depression, reduce symptoms, post-traumatic growth, and permanently and easily, and you handle more in life more easily. You can't get better than that. That's the power of auto organization. So you could think of it as auto organization is the mech is organic intelligence's explanation of what's happening underneath that you don't have to care about necessarily. You don't have to think about it, worry about it, understand it, care about it. But if you're interested in that question of what's happening, it's as your life gets better, as your anxiety goes down, as your symptoms go down, and you find that you're able to navigate relationships more easily and handle more. The explanation is auto organization. So it may not be, we're not at the point where we can just sell it. Everyone's talking about reduce anxiety, reduce trauma, nervous system regulation, tone your vagus nerve. But so not yet, but that is what's happening. And that's what's technically happening. And my interest is in the technical, accurate understanding of organic intelligence. And I would say one thing we could get into now and maybe in the future also, because we never have enough time, at least that's my experience. I'm not saying it's yours, but this idea of increasing capacity to process information and intensity, what exactly does it encompass? And what does it not encompass? I think that's a worthy, the example that many people may not care because they go to OI because they want to suffer less, feel better, less anxiety, less freeze, less nightmares, less migraines. So of course, you don't need to worry about exact contours of organic intelligence of auto organization. But we could explore that. For example, I asked the idea. I asked Steve, does it include doing trigonometry problems? Math, because you never think of math. You in terms of the market, people are just are suffering and they want to not suffer. They want symptom reduction, but they don't think of like I want to do math more easily. I have some C-suite clients who are interested in capacity growth for that sake, but and he said yes, it includes that. So we've this is not talked about so much because it's more information as an idea, but it may be able to increase intelligence. And anecdotally, I have observed that I think it might. I'm a little bit should I have said that because it's kind of an in-house kind of like we're kind of adjusting this idea, but we're really trying to think through logically if we're increasing capacity to process information intensity, that includes more than what most people go to organic intelligence for, intelligence being one example. I'm also curious about thinking about pain. So you have like all these people cutting up pain in different ways. Like there's I don't know if I'm getting it right, like nociceptic or something, or neuroplastic pain. I don't know if that's the same thing as nociceptic. There's neuropathic, neuroplastic. This pain means structural damage. This pain is just your brain telling you there's there's an alarm, but and I'm wondering how does AO auto organization apply to that? I'm just giving examples of
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
stimulate this idea of what exactly is the range of information and intensity
Yeah,
that okay.
I think it's exactly what you're saying. It is. I would agree with you that this applies to anything in life that we end up doing, whether it be math problems, trying to learn a new language, trying to play a musical instrument, getting done the things that need to get done in life, sitting by a parent as they are passing away and dying and being able to be with them and the intensity around the doctors and the other family members and all that kind of stuff. Like it does everything in life becomes improved and has the potential to be improved. And if you think about all development is an organizing process from lower states of organization to higher states of organization. They go from lower levels of conceptual, ability to think conceptually into increasing levels of abstraction. And what is intelligence but increasing levels of abstraction and pattern recognition that comes from that increasing capacity for abstracting ideas? That's going to be, so it doesn't matter what activity we're doing in attempting to become better at, even if it's Sudoku, right? Like, like you actually can improve skills because it does something to your whole system. So, yeah, to me, auto organization applies to everything that has to do with our state of being. Can I, I'm working on reading a book on epistemology right now, right? And I
Nice.
came to a chapter where I read it on the plane, and the plane was not the place to read it because I needed to sit and think and put things in the margins and write things down. And like it was so new to me, so many of the ideas and concepts, my brain didn't have a way of organizing the information. It
Right.
will as I read it again and as I think about it, but in time, that's going to grow. But in order to grow, there's going to be things that have to happen in the system to get rid of old ideas or incomplete ideas or, make new connections to other abstract ideas. All of that is going to happen. Is it happening? Can I do things to encourage that? Yes, if I, underline certain things, if I kind of outline the ideas, if I read it 5 or 6 or 7 times, like all of that's going to increase. And to me, that would be akin to self-regulation, so to speak.
Mm.
But what's really happening, to use your phrase, under the hood, is far more complex on a biological level. How is the brain actually integrating new concepts, new information? I am not controlling, I'm not pulling the levers on that process. I can do things that encourage it, but I'm not the it's my biology, it's my nervous system, it's my brain, and whatever that all of that is involved in the process, and I don't know how to do all of that. Right? I don't even know how that's all happening. The further we research into neuroscience, we get a better understanding of that. And still, it's going to come down to, well, life is happening. And life happens by auto organization less than it does by trying to make things happen.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I agree with that exact formulation. That's a
Okay.
whole conversation which I don't want. We don't have time, and I don't want to start it right now because that would require more thinking. So maybe in the future. But
Okay.
so I'll move on.
Yeah, yeah.
But I we've had these discussions outside of live stream before that we may have some disagreements, but we'll see if they come out later. Um, oh, I was going to go somewhere and I brain fogged out of it. Let's see if my system auto organizes in live stream. Okay, the whole we don't know what how auto organization happens under the hood. And by the way, when Steve and I got into the Sung Lee article, one issue was Lee's position is that the brain is the organ of central command, and it's the main allocator, it's the main integrator. And I believe Steve threw out the idea that it may instead be fully distributed throughout the biology. But then recently he's been talking more about brain networks, so maybe he's more aligned with Sung Lee. That's just an example of the hairy stuff we get into under the hood. But we don't know how it happens under the hood. We do know that it happens, and we do know how. We don't know what happens under the hood, just like I may not know what happens during digestion or sleep. But we know how to activate digestion, eat something. We know how to activate sleep. You just kind of go into bed and just wait there. And and we know how to activate auto organization, even though it may seem mysterious in practical application. You activate it by the two conditions of orientation and pleasure. So there is a very clear, direct, meaningful protocol for organic intelligence, which is orientation and pleasure. Protocol may not be the exact term because protocol usually means a mechanical, concrete, rigid thing. But the reason the process of auto organization may seem so magical and mysterious is that following orientation and pleasure is completely unpredictable. The sequencing of events that you're going to go through if you follow orientation and pleasure is completely unpredictable. You may have an agenda for the day, and then suddenly you have this idea. I feel like going to get some French fries, which you never do, let's say, and you have a lot of resistance because you're trying to lose weight, but I feel like getting some French fries, and orientation and pleasure may suggest, oh, how about you try? What if you tried? What if you just went and got French fries and ate them? Um, and the process of driving and getting French fries and all the internal experience you have, like, but they're bad for me, and but I'm interested and I enjoy it. That may move your system. That may auto organize your system. You may not, you may not know it, but so that's the kind of mystery of it. Just and that was just a randomly plucked example, going to get French
Right.
fries. So that could be an auto-organizing move, but it's just so mysterious because we don't associate, because that's not monitoring my thoughts or deep breathing, you
Right.
know.
To me, the word to introduce, I know we're running out of time. I had a couple thoughts that I wanted to
Oh,
add, but
go ahead,
but
go ahead. Yeah.
what you're naming there is the fact that, and we haven't mentioned it yet, that part of auto organization is the fact that there is feedback into your system. So when you take action, the environment automatically gives feedback, and it's in response to that feedback that the system then organizes for the next moment. So the reason I thought about that is partly you give the example of going to have French fries, and you go to have French fries, and if you have the French fries and you feel great afterwards and you've enjoyed them and there's no thought about it afterward, like the feedback in your system might be cool. That's great, which will
Yeah.
increase the likelihood that you'll go get French fries again. At the same time, the opposite could be that you go, you follow that impulse, you have the French fries, and afterwards you have a stomach ache, you have a headache, you feel bloated, all these unpleasant things happen. Well, that's feedback into your system, and you're probably, depending on the organization of your system, there's going to be less likely that you will pursue that, right?
Right.
And there's a caveat. The reason to that is if the system is in a highly disorganized state, we will often do things that are further disorganizing, even though the feedback tells us don't do it, right?
Yeah.
So that's another whole piece. But to me, it's like that's really important to realize that part of the reason we can rely on auto organization is because we have an environment that we live in that is constantly giving us feedback and is going to help continue to shape us in the direction of what is going to lead towards growth and well-being.
I like those as last words. Thank you, Rena. Exactly on time. I hope the audience is more organized from this conversation. And Ren and I will see you next time. And to learn more about either of us and the coaching we offer, there will be links in the description. I'll try to link the Sung Lee article also. And to learn more about organic intelligence, you can read my writing on Substack. Link will be in the description, and explore my video library on YouTube, including the short videos. I meticulously craft my Substack posts and YouTube videos to present substantive content that's direct, clear, and concise. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rena.